presidential politics a little bit here. You Democrats sure do like to fight, don't you?
That's what it is.
It is
That's
what
we
it
did.
is.
We enjoy it.
Does it bother you at all that the presidential, on the Democratic side, has become so nasty?
What was I saying about you beforehand? About how wonderful you were as a...
I wrote that part for you.
The fact remains that this contest, if it doesn't become nasty, and it has dipped into that at different times, but has altered and changed in the shape about how Americans are looking at the nominating process. I've been out across the country in a number of different states. And I'm up there in Maine. I didn't have a chance in Massachusetts, but up there in Maine and out in the Southwest. And the degree of interest and the degree of enthusiasm and the fact that the way this whole process has worked has been spread out over such a period of time that the people in these states really do believe that they can make a critical and final judgment and decision. That's true in Pennsylvania today. Barack Obama wins the Pennsylvania primary. Unlikely, but if he wins it, this race is all over. If he should win, he's now in the teens, 15 or 18 points behind. But people in Pennsylvania today really understand that they hold the future of the Democratic Party, and they think in a very important way the direction of where this country is going to go in their hands. And a week later, it's going to be Indiana and North Carolina, and they are all charged up, and people are connected. The turnouts are massive in these undertakings. And there were more people that turned out in the primaries and in several in Texas and than showed up in the general election. I mean, it's extraordinary, the outcomes. Now, the point about it is it going to deteriorate or is it going to be above board? And my own belief is this is an intense battle. And the reason it's intense is because the stakes are so high. And people get involved and they get passionate about this, particularly if they've got members of their family involved, and they're going to get close to the edge on it. My own sense is that this process ought to run its pathway, and I think it's, though the candidates have had sufficient warning over the period of these past weeks about keeping this on a different plane, I think if that happens, I'm very optimistic as to what the outcomes will be.
I think everybody wants to think that their vote counts, whether it's from Maine or Pennsylvania or Texas, whatever. In this particular case, however, the general consensus is that the bigwigs in the Democratic Party, the superdelegates, are going to have to decide this.
Oh, you look over here.
Do you want to decide this? Should the superdelegates decide this thing? Or should we just take it as it is right now? Who has the most popular vote? Who has the most delegates?
No, it should be decided by the delegates.
Do you want to decide?
That are selected, not by the superdelegates. I mean, I've said that. I feel very strongly, and I think that will be the ultimate result. They'll make the final judgment. That's where we did set up a process. This is a process under the political party. It isn't constitutional. You know, there's a different constitutional standards. Interesting, historically, the Constitution says time, manner, and place would be decided within the states. So the Supreme Courts always give maximum flexibility as long as there isn't a discrimination and denial of the opportunity to vote for the states to make these judgments and to parties make the judgments. Now the party did make the judgment, and I think people have to play by the rules. And I don't believe the people that didn't play by the rules ought to have the right to make the final judgment decision about who the winners and losers. They ought to be seated, and they ought to be able to have a role in terms of the life of a convention. But my view is the chosen delegates that have been selected, they're the ones that should make the final ultimate judgment and decision. And quite frankly, I think that's the way it's going to be. I've talked enough to the superdelegates. That's their view by and large. And I think they do feel that this process should run through. We've got qualified people that are experience bringing issues, and they ought to have the opportunity to speak. And I agree with that. But I think ultimately it's going to be judged by the pledged delegates.
You wouldn't like to join your fellow New England Senator Patrick Leahy and call for Hillary to bail out?
No,
at
I
this
think
point?
she's entitled to keep on in this campaign. As I said, people in those states are very much involved and engaged in this process.
Can the party afford a couple more months of this
And I think,
bickering?
I think they can. Look, I was in both in difficult battles. I saw in 1960 in my brother's campaign that ended in August, and there was a lot of very difficult. Lyndon Johnson, we came on the ticket, but he was had strong abuse. Adlai Stevenson, Hubert Humphrey was there, Symington was there. I mean, you had a lot of very high-powered and very vocal individuals. Rather an interesting story. Can I tell it just quickly? After the convention in 1960, and there was a lot of my brother got it on Wyoming at the very end of the first call, and there was still a lot of tension of all the candidates. And my brother flew back to the Cape on the plane, and he brought back with him the Lyndon Johnson people, all of his political, and they were up to the time Lyndon Johnson got on the ticket, were just ready to tear into the Kennedys and vice versa. And but they came on the plane. We came down to the Cape, and they had a cookout in the afternoon, and one half of the compound was Lyndon Johnson, the other half were the Kennedy people. They hardly talked. And then after the clam bake went on, some beer was served, wine was served.
That's the ticket.
They got it. That's amazing. What happens to Democrats? And they all started cooking along. And by 10:30 that night, they were just ready to go. And the next late that night, a group of them left, but a core of them stayed. The next day, the Humphrey people came down. The plane arrived, they all stayed, and the Kennedy and Johnson were on one end of the field, and the Humphrey people the other. They had the clam bake, they had the beer. They were all ready to go. And he did it for each one of the campaigns, and they kept probably 15 of the top people in each of the campaigns, and at the end of that a week, they had a campaign structure and organization that was just an extraordinary one. Now, that didn't mean that the people in Oshkosh were not, the Humphrey people and the Kennedy people would talk to each other. You know, there's resentments out there in the local community. But nonetheless, the essential elements in terms of the party came together in one of the most difficult times. And I think that that's true, particularly now, since there's not really much difference, very much difference in terms of philosophy between the candidates. That's the good news. The bad news is it's basically race and gender. So it gets very close to the negative aspects very, very, very quickly. But philosophically, there's not the differences that existed in past campaigns.
Did Barack Obama get bruised by his preacher?
Well, I think he would say yes, to some extent. I think most people thought that he handled the situation very, very well. I certainly do. I think it remains to be seen what the lingering kinds of concerns would be. And, you know, the polls show that the people that he lost the most were probably some Republicans. Probably he's going to lose those in any event. But I thought he handled the situation with great ability.
Whoever wins this thing, what is the best that we can hope for when we look to Washington to deal with the ills of this country, whether it be the economy, the housing crisis, or the oil prices, or whatever? We all agree that George Bush's favorability ratings are lower than you-know-what, but the only thing lower than his numbers are those of the Democratic Congress. Mm-hmm. What have we got? Well, give me a reason for some optimism about what's going to happen in Washington for the next decade.
The interesting and the numbers in the Congress effectively always follow the president. If you look back, since they've started the numbers in the with the exception of Watergate, they've always sort of effectively followed. If the president's down, the Congress is down historically. But I'll give you that we are not nearly as relevant. The Congress is, the Senate isn't nearly as relevant as we were at other times. And the real question, I think, that's before the country, and the principal reason that I supported Barack Obama, is because I think he can bring about this kind of really monumental change in terms of how this country approaches its problems. When have we done it? We did it in the 30s with Franklin Roosevelt. We had Social Security. We did it in the 1960s. What happened then? Well, not only did we see a march to progress in knocking down walls of discrimination on race and religion and ethnicity, but also on gender, also on disability. And we also said, look, we care about our seniors. We care about our parents. Okay, we passed Medicare. Look, we care about people that are elderly people that are also poor. We passed Medicaid. Well, we care about our kids. All right, we passed the higher education. We care about the very poorest kids in this country. Okay, we're not, as a nation, we're going to say the poorest of the poor are a national commitment when we pass Title I. That is when the Congress was relevant to the challenges that we're facing. Many people, there's some people who disagree with it. There are not many of those that have passed, even though we had overwhelming Republican opposition, that are Republicans are trying to repeal now. And the people that were involved with them are still bearing the scars. So we saw that moment and that time when the institutions were responsive to the challenges that we are facing as a country. I want to go back to that time. I think it's possible to go back to that time. You can't go to a Barack Obama rally and not see the faces, particularly of the young, who have been turned off by division, by special interests, and by the appeal to fear, that are ready to go to a different time. That, I think, is what this whole race is about, myself. The past and the future. And that is what I think is needed. You need that in order to get a health care program through. You need that in order to get the climate change through. You need that to change our whole education system, to try to be responsive to what the investment. You need that in order to permit America to be able to compete in a global economy. That's where we're going to be faced. We can't just be interminably bickering with each other, which unfortunately is the case at the present time. So my hope, Gary, is that we'll go to a different time, different phase. I find that the people are prepared to sort of do that, are ready to go on it, and I think that's the message of hope, I think, that we ought to take advantage of.
Let's see what the people here want to talk about. Our colleague Dan Ray has been out there collecting some questions from the audience. Dan, you have the floor, sir.
All right, thank you very much. I have the floor, but you folks still have the podium. Sort of playing the role of Phil Donahue today, folks. Been collecting questions. Senator, we have a variety of questions here. Some I'll read verbatim. Others I'll try to basically condense several questions into one. Since we were just talking presidential politics, this is one I'm only going to read verbatim. Why could Senator Obama not be talked into being the vice presidential candidate nominee and let Hillary have her turn now?
I missed the question. Why?
I'm sorry.
It was a little difficult to follow.
Okay.
Why?
The question is, I'll paraphrase a little bit.
Okay.
There's someone in the audience, perhaps more,
okay,
who feel that this is Hillary Clinton's turn, if you will.
I see.
And so the question is, why could Barack Obama, your candidate, not be talked into accepting the vice presidential nomination and allow Hillary Clinton to have her turn now? I think I know your answer, but you got the floor.
Why don't you take a crack at it?
Well, I think he has more votes, and I think that it'll let votes count.
Pretty good answer. You got the second one? I'll take that one. The leadership for a political party in our country, Republican or Democrat, with the possibilities of leadership for this nation and the world, is something that has to be earned. And earned with the confidence of the American people. It's not something that's really should be considered in another way. And I think that's one of the great things about this primary system. These candidates are out there trying to earn it every single day. That's the way they should. And ultimately, you're going to have someone, maybe very close, but that's the way this business goes. You can look at the closeness in the presidential campaigns with our colleague John Kerry and Al Gore. You look at the closest to that, President Kennedy in 1960. So we have rules, and we have a process and a system on it, and the American people want a person that is going, they want to be able to see this person, they want to hear the person, they want to be able to listen to it and to make and to express themselves. That's part of our whole fundamental system, and there's no entitlement in terms of that, nor should there be that, or as a matter of fact, in any other office.
Let's just, for the fun of it, see what